Welcome to today's episode of What to Say and How to Say It, the podcast to help you change your Christian marriage. I'm with Kyle Hargrove today, and we've been kicking around some of the ideas and controversies of the last week. And what we decided we were talking about today is how to keep the enemy out of your marriage, how to keep the enemy out of your conversations specifically. I think we have a really good example in the last week of an excellent, stellar human being, Charlie Kirk, who died way too young for his conversation. And if there's all sorts of media clips out there that paint a picture of this man as being racist and misogynistic and all of that. And I'm sorry, he's not. If you watch the entirety, if you get context around those things and you see the full clip, then you go, oh, as so many other people are doing, by the way. And going, that's wow, that was really misrepresented. But I think he's a great example of how to keep the enemy out of conversation. You see him behave respectfully and gently, kindly, and challenging, which is what Jesus did, called us to a higher level of being in an ethical and truthful way. So I admired the man a ton. I'm astonished that we're at a place in our country where we can murder someone and then people are celebrating that. It's one thing to, say, yeah, that was a good thing he died if it was an evil man. But the amount of glee over someone who was a good man, who is a father and husband, is just, it's reprehensible. And what's interesting to me is that people need to look up what fascism means because the people claiming he was a fascist are actually participating in that activity themselves. So that's all I'll say about that. This is not a political podcast, but I think one of the things that he was excellent at was keeping the enemy out of his conversations with students on campuses and on his podcast when he interviewed guests. And I know from doing this work, and Kyle, you too, you see the enemy, some sort of demon, manifest through the words of one person in assault on the other, and it is messed up. Like the stuff we give breath to, and I've been guilty of it myself, not anymore, hopefully. The temptation is still there sometimes, just being honest, but it's hardly ever a thing, but that is real. People manifest evil in their relationships and it destroys people and families. It's gut-wrenching.
You're right. It is. I don't know of a time, at least in recent memory, that I've been as shocked by not only what is happening in our society, and it's not just Charlie Kirk. It's lawmakers in Minnesota. It's children in a school in Colorado. It's
Yeah.
children and adults that are being murdered by people that aren't supposed to be even in our country. It's attempts on the life of our leader.
Hmm.
um, and how it has people say, oh, this has been going on forever. Not at this clip.
Right.
And really, I think, to our point today, it's not the action of the individual in these situations so much as it is the divisiveness of the conversation around it after it happens.
Hmm.
That is shocking and terrifying,
Yeah.
actually. And so, when we see this societally, it is impossible for it not to show up in other places where it doesn't belong also. And I think that's what kind of brought about our topic for today was, when we sit in our respective professions working with people helping them understand the importance of open-minded communication. And I want to remind everybody that's listening or watching, and it's not the first time I've made this reminder in this format, but that being open-minded is not simply listening to somebody else or someone else's opinion. It's listening with the willingness to change your mind.
Hmm.
A lot of people say that and think they're open-minded because they read a book about something they didn't agree with, or they listened to somebody explain something that they, they didn't see eye to eye with. But if they're not willing to listen with the willingness, okay, I'm perfectly open to not only hear you, but to hear what you have to say. And if you can convince me I'm wrong, I'll stand
Hmm.
with you.
Yeah.
But when we have all this going on around us, and I don't know if it trickles down or if it trickles up. But let's just say, for the sake of the conversation, it's trickled down, and what's going on in our society begins to trickle into other relationships that we have. And we're seeing a lot of that right now. We're seeing a lot of people who heretofore have done a decent job of getting along. And now that they begin speaking their minds on cultural issues and societal issues, not getting along so well anymore.
Right.
But what's happening in our society also frequently happens inside marriages and
Hmm.
inside primary relationships.
Yeah.
Whereas these conversations, and I like to call them courageous conversations because they do involve confrontation. And that's a
Hmm.
terrifying word that triggers so many people. So it is a courageous thing to step into a confrontation with your spouse with the intent of fulfilling your duty, your obligation, your honor, to work problems through, to resolve issues rather than to convince that person that you're right and that they're wrong,
Hmm.
or that you're
Yeah.
better and that they're less.
Yeah.
So there are so many couples that when they go to having confrontations, they are not in any way, shape, or form um, managed well.
Hmm.
And so they lose context, they lose a lot of things. They lose their tempers, they lose their composure, and then begin to do what enemies do rather
Hmm.
than what partners that ought to be welded together do.
Yeah.
And I think that's my concern with what's going on is we're behaving like enemies when we're in situations where we have the opportunity to resolve an issue, to solve a problem, to make things better.
Yeah. And you said something earlier about being open to being wrong. And, we have to kind of also have a definition of what is right and what is wrong. And if you don't have a moral grounding that's based on biblical truths, if that's not your guidebook for morality, then, like the guy that was arrested in Europe for a minute that didn't know it was not okay in the UK to rape 12-year-old girls because it's okay in his country. Hold up. We need to get on the same page of morality uh, to even have a starting point. Now, most of the people that you and I work with, or a good chunk of them, at least in the work that we do together, these are Christian couples that want to stay married, that want to honor God with their covenant and treat each other in the lens of the Holy Spirit. They want to walk in Jesus's footsteps. They want to follow the rabbi. And boy, are we bad at that. Like, I don't claim to be perfect at it by any stretch of the imagination. But if we don't have that as the core of our goal, then we don't even really have anything oh, there's no level playing field here. Like somebody's playing on rocks, and then the other people are getting the green to run the bases on. It doesn't make any sense. So that's a piece of it. And
Yeah.
to your point earlier, you mentioned if things, spread out or come in, I really believe that whatever you're seeing in culture is a reflection of what's happening in the dyad, in the family, in the marriage. And so we've got all of this stuff happening, and I'm not saying that culture hasn't helped with it. There's been some negative influences culturally for sure, social media being one of them. And then the way we've dishonored marriage and human life, another for sure. But in the dyad, people have lost their ability to hold space for a difference of opinion, to be
Right.
open to their partner having a different experience than they do. And I think that comes from the lack of solid identity that we seem to be suffering from as a nation and as Christian families. Like, who
Yeah.
are we? We're people pleasers now. And, there's something good to be said about, being peacemakers for sure. But to give up your identity so that somebody else's feathers don't get ruffled, so you're going to lie to the alcoholic, like, come on. That's not who we are. It's not biblical.
Well, you see so many people, including married couples, who have gone sideways due to their beliefs in political affiliations.
Hmm.
Okay, let's stop a minute. We're assigning moral value to a political affiliation. Why? That's not what political affiliation, or not what politics is. It's not what it's about. Um, you know, being an elephant or a donkey, or representing one with your political preferences, is about how we want to do government,
Right.
and it's about the law, and it's about a lot of other things that should include and should involve the taking in of moral thought and moral
Mhm.
behaviors. But we're identifying with politics instead of identifying with where our hearts are, or where they should be. And
Mhm.
just, to give you a pebble for your pond, something to think about. Um, I have heard numerous reflections over the last several days about morals and moral high ground and moral this and moral that. And what I've heard tells me that a lot of people, I think, don't have a good grip on the difference in morals and values, because they're not the same animal.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because values are something we all have. Everybody, every single one of us that lives and breathes, walks on 2 feet, and has opposable thumbs. We have values. Not all of them are good,
Hmm.
but they are nonetheless values. There are no bad morals.
Fair. Yeah.
But I think the question would be, from where do you draw your moral fiber?
Hmm.
Or do you draw a moral fiber?
Hmm.
Because I think the truth is, we either have an understanding of moral thought, attitude, behavior, or we don't. And if we don't, it's kind of difficult to live a life that is morally upright.
Yeah. Yeah. I have
So,
oh, go ahead.
really you.
I have a client right now that is really just so bitter and resentful and contemptuous, critical of her spouse, and refusing forgiveness, that I'm at this point, I'm kind of going, this is demonic. This is beyond, there's a wound from your 7-year-old self here operating. There's a demonic something here that needs to be expunged because the rigidity of which we're trying to hold on to unforgiveness here. And yeah, their spouse is trying to move forward imperfectly, of course, to build the connection again. But forgiveness is just not a thing that is forthcoming. And the interesting thing about this is that when we get stuck in that, we're operating out of a false identity because we have no right to harbor unforgiveness as Christians. Like, who you climbing up on the throne and doing judgment? Like, that's not your job. Get off before you get smited. Like, seriously, be afraid of God. Like, seriously. Yeah, he's a loving father, but man, he didn't tell you you could sit in his chair. And people forget that. And so that reverence piece and the
Mhm.
warm fuzzy Jesus and all of that, like I believe in that too, but it's also like we've lost respect and reverence for him, and we don't we don't hold the cross in the proper frame of mind, the proper reference. And instead of working through these things and running towards what do I need to do to forgive here? And I've been in that space myself where I can't forgive, and so I go get help from one of our deliverance ministers. I'm like, there's something messed up in me because I know what I'm supposed to do, and I'm having a hard time doing it. Like it's wrong. Let's evict whatever this
Mhm.
is. Um, and I want it gone yesterday. But to not do that just fuels the emotionality in the relationship. And our first rule of action is don't engage when you're emotional because nothing good ever comes from that. So people want to have courageous conversations with people. Well, you can't do that if you're operating 24/7 out of being triggered because you can't forgive.
Right. Yeah.
That's impossible.
Well, and I think that that actually is a beautifully constructed segue into kind of the point that I'd like to push today, and that is what happens when we either enter into these conversations emotionally or we become emotional once we're in there. Because we can agree to not be that way. That doesn't mean it's going to stay that way.
Right. Yep.
And so we've got to have the adaptability and the flexibility to for whether it's me or whether it's the other person
Yep.
to and the agreement to say, this is getting into that zone where we're not going to be productive.
Yep.
So
Okay.
when we don't have that switch to flip or
Uh-huh.
that I don't even know what you would call it, but a safety
Yeah.
to say we need to take a break. We need to put this on hold for a minute, an hour, a day. I really encourage people not to sit on things for more than a day.
Right.
But what happens when we allow the emotion to infiltrate that conversation is we stop acting like um, partners.
Yeah.
We stop acting like we're on the same team, and we start behaving as if we're the enemy.
Hmm.
And I was this really jarred me a couple of weeks ago when my pastor was in his sermon, and he said, I've determined that identifying who your enemies are is not really all that difficult. And he just put two criteria on there. He said, if they ridicule and if they ridicule you and exaggerate about you, they're at least behaving as if they're the enemy, if not being your enemy.
Yep.
So think about it a minute. If you get in that conversation with your spouse and you get emotional, or you came there emotional and you hid it until you got in there when you couldn't hide it anymore, lifting that person up is not what's on your mind.
Right.
propping them up and giving them the credit that they're due and the honor that they're due and the respect that they're due, even in the midst of a disagreement or a conflict.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's not your goal.
Yeah.
But, how odd would it be in that conversation for someone's behavior to get recognized that's part of the conflict and they say, yeah, well, you think that's bad? You can't even, something that they had failed at before.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like it would not, this conversation did not happen, by the way, but it would not have an example of that would have been when I rented the skid steer and went out to smooth out the granite for a make the driveway level. And I'm glad you can't see it right now.
Okay.
But
I'll take your word for it.
so it's a skid steer with a bucket on it, and
Yeah.
I'm going out there to push over this mound of gravel and make it level. And I end up wrecking the corner of our shed.
Hmm.
If Danny and I had had a conversation the next day where she was upset with me and I had said something about her behavior, and she said, "You can't even level the driveway."
Ouch.
Okay. That's kind of contemptuous.
Hmm.
Okay.
For sure.
That's a little bit of ridicule,
Yeah.
right? And it didn't happen. Okay. And she
Right.
doesn't
Right.
need it. So I'm just using it as an example. But those are the kind of things that we start looking for. Little arrows to sling,
Yeah.
darts. Okay. And that's not gonna solve the problem. That's not gonna get us to a loving conclusion that we can all live with, and not just live with, but support, get behind.
Yeah. Well,
You
and I
know,
think people don't realize that they're being useful to the enemy, that they are
yeah,
returning evil with evil.
yeah,
And half the time, the evil that they're returning is based on perceived evil because of stuff they haven't worked out in themselves.
right.
Yeah.
Because you're not really the enemy in that situation, but you're acting like it.
Yeah. Yeah. I like Marcus Warner talks about this as we go into enemy mode instead of being in friend mode. And I wish I didn't have that space. Like I don't visit there very often anymore. But the truth is that I've had that in my life, and I don't know literally anybody, if they were being honest, that would say that they didn't also. That's real. That's a human existence thing.
Right,
We do
right.
not want to feed that, and it's very wise to not participate when that shows up, whether it's us or our spouse that's acting that way. And so choosing to say, okay, I love you, and this is not who we are, even if it was me that just said something rude. I don't want to talk to you like that. I clearly have something I need to work out. I'm so sorry that you didn't deserve that. And then taking a break. But, if our spouse is doing that, we have to do the same thing. And if we don't, then all sorts of hell breaks loose all over everything and everybody. And we have
Hmm.
a responsibility to the marriage to not engage in that.
That's right. So, with what we should be engaging in requires calm, it requires thought, it requires logic, it requires the understanding of why we're there. And usually, what it is we're fighting about is not why we're there. What it is a symptom of a problem that is probably going to be a bit more on the emotional side, but can still be discussed without being terribly emotional. We just have to commit to not just be taught, but to practice in real life, whether it's big situations or little situations, these ideas of behaving like someone, who is not your rival, but someone who is your best, deepest, most significant supporter. So the two things that Pastor Chris talked about were you'll see ridicule and you'll see exaggeration. And I know that I've been told by others before. I remember years and years ago sitting at the end of a meal and this topic came up that I am prone to not finishing things that I start. And I recall my breathing getting ragged and my blood pressure going up and my face turning red. And I looked down at my empty plate and I said, "Here's something that I just finished. I finished my dinner. How about that?" You know, and we went just back and forth, but it's not that someone, that was just using an absolute. And that's part of exaggeration, though.
Exactly.
Absolutes are a huge weapon of exaggeration.
You
Something happens.
always, you never, those. Yep.
Yeah. And if you think about it, I think there's not anybody listening or watching that would think this through and say, I don't really know what that means. I don't know what that looks like, sounds like, smells like, feels like, and I've certainly never done it. Because we all take part in that. But the intentionality that you and I are talking about right now is a huge imperative when it comes to being able to have these difficult conversations without providing grand entrances for the devil to come in
Yeah.
and mop up and lick his chops and enjoy it,
Yep. Yep.
because we're given, you know, pretty stout counsel when it comes to what God expects for us in terms of how we meet with other people in times of difficulty or in times of disagreement,
Mhm.
you know. And for it would be against biblical principle for a husband and a wife to argue and for one or the other to gloat over something the other had failed at.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that list is as long as your
It's
arm,
long. Yeah.
you
For both
know?
of them.
Yeah. So, and then New Testament talks to us about building each other up. And what
Mhm.
comes out of our mouth is to be building up rather than to be tearing down. And then there's also judgment
Mhm.
that's addressed in the New Testament, and a pretty stout assertion that if we're judgmental, that the same measure
Yep.
will be used against us. And so,
Terrifying.
and so overall, what we're seeing in Scripture is an encouragement of compassion and other understanding
Mhm.
rather than mockery,
Yep.
and rather than finding ways to wound somebody with past experiences, past behaviors, past failures, whatever you want, whatever they are.
Well, and to speak to that for a second, past can be what just happened.
Yeah,
So we
last
had,
minute.
yeah, just 5 minutes ago even, we had a staff retreat, and there was a misunderstanding. Somebody got their feelings hurt, and we dealt with that and apologized. I issued an apology because I was part of it too, and I had no idea, and I'm so glad the person brought it up. And then and some other people were involved, right? So there, but here's what happened. They started talking about the order of events. Well, you did this, and then I did that, and then this other person said, "No, no, you were over there doing this," and then and this. So it kept going, and I went, I put an end to it. I just stop it right now. Hold it, hold up. This is not who we are. Everybody's entitled to their perception. This has already been solved and settled. It doesn't matter what anybody's individual perception is here. We're moving on. We will take no part in foolish arguments because the details around this do not matter. What matters
Exactly.
is somebody's feelings got hurt. We addressed it. They felt better, and we're moving on. To go back and dig that up and poke around in it to establish who's right and who's wrong is from the enemy. Stop it. We're not doing that. That's not who we are. And then I was a little bit lit, and they're all just looking at me like their eyes are big. And then I said, "That came out kind of harsh. I'm really sorry, but we're not going to do that. That's I love you guys. Like I can't watch this knowing what it is. These are
Mhm.
foolish arguments that have no place.
even if
Yeah.
you never get the order right.
No, you can't. Like, oh my gosh, almost all arguments are foolish. They really are.
They
And if you
are.
just give people, you can have your perception, like it's fine. I don't care. I don't need to be right. I'm not perfect. I could be wrong about this. And even if I'm not, who cares? Can we just move forward?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, and I've had to stop before in the midst of an intimate, animated discussion and say to another person, please hear me. I am not your enemy.
Hmm.
Because either the perception by them that I am, or me feeling like I am, is going to cause some major retrospect
Yeah.
down the road and damage right now.
Yeah.
And the retrospect will be because of that damage. So I don't want to be creating damage, and I don't want to be perceived as someone who is.
Yeah.
So this is not something I want to preach to somebody else. This is something I need to apply to myself.
Yeah. Me too.
And if more of us will apply it to ourselves, to our own thought process, our own intentionality and how we prepare for something like that, and our own behaviors in the midst of it, that's going to bleed over. It will have a trickle down effect, a trickle over, trickle up, trickle around. I don't
Trickle
know.
thumb.
But yeah, it's gonna be noticed. It's gonna be appreciated.
Yeah.
And the design is that it'll be replicated.
Amen to that. That's what we want.
That's exactly what we want.
Yeah, that's what we want. Well, this is a interesting topic today. I really hope our listeners walk away with a deeper conversation with the Lord around where am I at in this? Am I useful to the enemy? Do I act like the enemy sometimes? Am I an enemy to my spouse? Can I take ownership over that and focus on following Christ no matter what my circumstances are?
You want to hear my best impression?
Of,
Andy Rooney,
okay.
the old CBS 60 Minutes guy.
Yeah, yeah.
You ever wonder why sometimes you act like the enemy? I know I do.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, well, we're all sinners, so there's that.
Yeah. And then you spend the last 5 minutes of 60 minutes just
Yep.
explaining why we act like the enemy. So
Yeah,
maybe we should take up that format in our podcast.
I think so. That's pretty cool. Maybe we'd get people closer to the 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative during
One a
conflict.
minute. I know how.
If you want to connect with Kyle, you can reach him at Kyle, Kyle Hargrove, HARGROVELPC at gmail.com. And if you're wanting to take your marriage into a better space, like one of our current couples, I'm so excited about them. They started the marriage transformation with us 4 months ago. Not sure they liked each other, much less loved each other. And now and they were separated, and now they're pretty much mostly almost all the time together. Not all, the separation isn't fully closed, but they're together. They love each other again and they're friends again, which is and the best thing she said was we're on the same side of the fence. We fight against the enemy together now instead of at each other, which I think that is beautiful. That's what we hope for you. So if you live in the big state of Texas, reach out to Kyle. If you are interested in learning more about this, you can go to greaterimpact.org and take our marriage assessment and see what's next for you. Be sure to like and subscribe and check out the next episode on dealing with conflict because there's more here. Love you wildly. We'll talk soon.